driven by empathy to genuinely understand what the customer's going through and how and why they're looking for a solution like the one that you're marketing. And once you get clear about that, and you've been able to validate that, yes, you've heard them correctly, the messages are resonating, that's when you use AI to take your story to market at scale with consistency.
Step into the world of success with Your Brand Amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. Jed Morley, I am so thrilled to have you on Your Brand Amplified because we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics and yours, brand strategy and building brands that can scale. You have worked with so many brands in your career. I want to hear a little bit about that story, how you got your start in business, and how that led you to the creation of your own organization, which is Backstory Branding, where you are the founder, CEO, and brand strategist, and also led you to write an Amazon best-selling book, Building a Brand That Scales, Unlocking the Hidden Value of Your Brand and Business, which came out this summer. So thank you for being here on Your Brand Amplified.
Great being with you, Annika. Appreciate the invitation.
Let's talk about your background and all the things that led you to create your own company.
Sounds great. Yeah. So I started out in a variety of marketing roles. And what I learned over time was that my favorite part of the marketing process was establishing the brand strategy foundation and clarifying and articulating the value of a company and its offerings to specific audiences. And over the course of holding those jobs and helping those companies scale, working with like-minded colleagues and friends, mentors, I developed a process where I could help companies repeatedly break through the clutter, set themselves apart, and more clearly communicate their value at a company level and an audience level at scale. So I decided to do what I could to maximize my impact. And that's when I turned to consulting as a way to contribute more to more companies.
Nice. What was happening at all of the companies that you were part of that you helped build up? Were they then selling, exiting, getting massive customer growth?
Yeah, the goal with the process that we facilitate for clients is to help them get to that next level of growth and success. So there are a variety of inflection points. It can be when a company is growing beyond founder-led sales, or when they're introducing a new product or expanding into a new market. Those are times when the story has lagged behind the reality of the company. The company is able to contribute and deliver more value than its story is currently communicating. And when there's a gap between your current perception and the desired perception of your brand and business, that's an opportunity for this process to make a big impact. We've had clients go on to exit. We've had clients go on to raise $100 million rounds of funding and financing. And it just depends on where you are in that growth trajectory. But the goal is to significantly accelerate the value creation process so that you can achieve your goals.
Amazing. I want to hear about this process because you have specifically coined the process after iterating with so many different organizations.
The process is called the Backstory Brand Wheel Framework, and it consists of 4 phases of work. The first phase is brand discovery, where we dive deep to understand the current perception and the desired perception and the gap that exists between the two, to inform the brand strategy that helps to close that gap with the right words, images, and experiences. We interview internal executives and team leaders and develop hypothetical positioning and messaging concepts to then test with customers and partners through a series of external in-depth interviews. We found no better method than in-depth interviews, or IDIs as they're sometimes called, because it gives you the opportunity to understand the context that customers and partners bring to their perception of your company. The context is huge because if you don't know what they're comparing you to in terms of existing alternatives, it's difficult to know how to position your brand relative to the way they perceive the category in the market. So by comparing that internal perspective to the external perspective, it gives you a much better idea of where those gaps are and what you can do to close them. And of course, we look at the current communications of the company and the market landscape from a competitive analysis standpoint. So phase one, brand discovery, yields insights that inform the brand strategy. Phase two has to do with articulating and clarifying your brand foundation. Just like the foundation of a house or a building, you have to have a foundational shared understanding of who you are, what you do, and why it matters. So we look at 5 foundational elements. The first is brand foundation, the difference you make beyond making money. Brand position, what you stand for in the minds of customers. Brand promise, the overarching value you deliver to customers. Brand pillars, your 5 biggest differentiators and benefits. And finally, brand personality, the way your brand looks, sounds, and feels. Those 5 foundational elements set the stage for everything that follows. And it's interesting to note that a lot of companies think they've got elements of their brand foundation defined, but if you were to listen to the answers and responses they share in our one-on-one interviews, they all seem to have a different answer. And so it's an opportunity to create alignment within the leadership team, and that cascades down throughout the entire organization. And that alignment results in an increased focus and clarity in the go-to-market phase of work. So phase 2, brand foundation, leads to brand expression, giving voice to your vision, defining an ideal customer profile at the company level, individual buyers at the customer persona level, and then messaging that communicates your value to each of those audiences. And finally, the outer ring of the brand wheel framework is brand activation, taking the story to market with consistency. So the inner 2 circles of the brand wheel framework, brand foundation and brand expression, informed by that brand discovery insight work, gives you clarity. The outer ring of the brand wheel framework takes that story to market with consistency. So it's really about clarity and consistency.
There's so many things that you mentioned that I think are so key. And working on the PR side of things, when I was in that area as my main focus, I found the same thing. People would come say, I'm ready to be out in the world, to be interviewed, but they had no idea what their company stood for, what their brand pillars were, what, any of the foundational information that you're talking about. And it doesn't matter what you're doing in comms, whether it's the brand strategy, whether it is public relations strategy, marketing, right? Advertising, sales cycle. If you don't have this, I don't see a way for companies to succeed. I mean, maybe there are some outlier organizations, but this is so important to have that great base, because then, like you said, you can figure out who your competitors really are, and they might not be who you think they are, right? There's so many factors that fall into this that people just really don't consider. So I love this framework that you've put together and how it cascades or moves in the wheel, right, from one thing to the next.
That's right. Each phase builds on the last. And we love to partner with other marketing specialists on that outer ring, brand activation. We recognize that there is expertise and that you have to focus and specialize to be really good at what you do. And so we often partner with complementary agencies, consultancies, and team members on the internal side of our client teams to take those stories to market, building off the foundation that has been established so that we're all aligned and working in unison to achieve shared goals and outcomes.
Lovely. You mentioned a couple of things, but what do you see as the number one thing that brands get wrong?
The number one thing brands get wrong is they limit themselves to what they think a brand is. So sometimes we'll hear clients talk about wanting to refresh their brand, and what they mean is they want to update their logo. And so
Right.
there's some education there around what a brand is. And sometimes companies limit the responsibility to the marketing team for building that desired brand perception. And because brands are the sum total of all of the experiences we have with a company, it's really important that we consider all of the customer-facing touch points and the people responsible for those moments of truth to make sure that we're all in the same understanding of what we're trying to communicate, the perception we want to try to shape and influence, so that we can work together to have an impact that is coordinated and integrated.
And you mentioned that you do work with companies that are building to exit and that are also building just to acquire more customers and have a legacy business. Is there a difference in the way that you work with the brands? It always starts with a flywheel, but then do you have to help them consider how they're going to evolve differently?
That's a great question. When a company is intent on having an exit, it's really important to understand the value drivers that can increase the valuation of the company and command a premium multiple when they exit. And there are four intangible capitals that can contribute to that. There's human capital, customer capital, structural capital, and social capital. And we can impact the customer capital at Backstory. We also work on the social capital component by helping companies codify their culture. So social has to do with the internal culture and the way that the brand interacts with and relates to the communities it serves. We also can develop structural capital in the sense that we can help businesses create repeatable branding methodologies and processes, especially around messaging. Messaging is an area where it's very easy to lose track of the latest version of the best way to communicate your value to specific audiences. And if there are any vacuums, that will be filled by well-meaning people trying to meet the day-to-day demands of their jobs. So it's important to be proactive and to keep that messaging fresh and to make sure that you're testing your assumptions, getting feedback from customers on what messages resonate and why. We call that message market fit, so that you're not assuming that what you're communicating is resonating. And standardizing those processes gives potential buyers of your business confidence that they can continue to produce the kind of earnings that you've been generating. The other thing we find is that companies need to grow beyond what the core founding team can communicate in terms of their ability to articulate and adapt the message to different audiences. That's one of those key inflection points when the business grows beyond what the founding team can personally affect in terms of onboarding new employees, training them, teaching them the right way to communicate the story to each of those different audiences. So those intangible capitals don't show up on a balance sheet, but they're the main drivers behind accelerating the value of a business and making it sellable, because you can then transfer the value that has been generated because it's not dependent on the founder or their ability to personally foster close relationships with customers. You've been able to create scalable processes that enable a team to successfully drive profitable growth independent of the founder and the founding team.
I'm really curious, and this is maybe a little, it's not off topic, but it's a little different question. I'm thinking through the fact that as brand marketers and strategists, like I teach a podcast course, I talk to, branding is the foundation of any product service, including a podcast. So having my students walk through what is their brand, what is their purpose, mission, vision, values, so what are they really trying to impart? So how does that turn into their messaging, their key statements? And then how does that, a mini version of what you do with not all the steps, certainly, because it's a different use case. But we see large brands, and this may be just because these are huge companies, but we see a lot of brands that, depending on who's in the Oval Office, they'll change some of their strategies, some of their verbiage, some of the ways that they move in the world. And to me, that erodes brand trust. We've seen that with things like Target going back and forth about what their value statements are. Sometimes they say that's because they're beholden to shareholders, but it seems like they're not necessarily taking care of the company culture the way that you're, discussing it. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that and why maybe brands need to pay less attention to that side of things and more attention to who they actually are as brands.
I'm glad you'd mentioned the susceptibility of companies to being blown in different directions depending on the wind. And if you're intent on building a distinctive brand position and identity, it's really important to be authentic and honest with yourself as to what you value, and then be consistent. And whether it's a social issue or business strategy, it's really easy to succumb to the pressure of short-term financial performance metrics. And even then, the best intentions sometimes get sidetracked. Nike lost its way recently. They had someone for the first time leading the company that didn't come up through the product innovation ranks. And as a result, the company lost its focus and lost its footing, disconnected from its core audiences. It's resetting now. That could have been avoided had the company continued to be true to its purpose to provide innovation and inspiration for every athlete in the world. And there are other examples that you mentioned, Target's one of them, and others, where your leadership is under pressure to perform financially. And if they dip their toe into certain causes or areas of the market and dabble in different departments of cause-related marketing or lose sight of their purpose, they have an identity crisis. People don't know who they are, what they stand for. And as a result, it causes confusion. And confusion always leads to lost profits, lost revenue, and lost confidence.
Do you have any examples that you can think of where companies are able to recover from this? I mean, the Nike example, I know there are many other brands that have had different, inflection, failure points, whatever you want to, lessons learned.
We've worked with companies sometimes multiple times over a period of years. And one thing we've noticed is that when companies innovate on the product side, sometimes they want to give it all to their customers all at once. And that can be difficult for customers to absorb. It takes time for them to understand the new paradigm, the new opportunity, the new way of doing work. So it's really important to be close enough to your customers to understand what they're ready to accept and receive, and to pace the rate at which you introduce new concepts and new offerings to allow time for customers to be progressing with you so that you don't overwhelm them, so that you don't lose them in the process of trying to introduce new innovation to the market. And some customers obviously are ready to take on more than others at a point in time. So if you can tune and tailor the messaging to different stages of readiness to adopt those new innovations, I think that can really help to serve your customer relationships long term, and not just assume that just because it's available, your customers are ready to receive it. I think it's easy to overwhelm your customers if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And it doesn't matter if you're a very small business, medium size, or an enterprise solution. The same concepts apply.
That's true. I think having empathy for customers is one of the common denominators that we see across companies that have done really well. We had the opportunity to consult with Lucid Software's Lucid Chart product, and I was impressed with their willingness to take time to understand why customers were buying Lucid Chart and the value they were getting out of it. And the motive, the incentive behind this work was to be prepared to sell into large organizations at an enterprise license level. To do that, Lucid Chart needed to be able to articulate its value on a functional basis. So for HR, for IT, for software engineering, for operations, sales, and marketing, what is the value proposition of Lucid Chart to each of those audiences? And as a result of the 65 plus interviews that we did with Lucid Chart's product team, we were able to uncover and reverse engineer the underlying pain points, the jobs to be done, the use cases that motivated customers to use Lucid Chart on a one-off basis. So there could be 15 different individuals using Lucid Chart at a bigger company, but they didn't know that one another were using Lucid Chart, and the company didn't have a company-wide license. So today, if you go onto Lucid Chart's website, you can see under their solutions tab, they've tailored and tuned their messaging to specific audiences. They've translated the high-level value proposition and brand foundation and targeted and tailored it to specific subgroups and audiences. And that level of understanding puts Lucid Chart in a league of its own. There are very few companies that take the time to tune their message to that level of specificity, to get that level of connection. And it comes from a place of empathy, from being genuinely interested in the problems people have and how your solutions solve them. So I think empathy is what fuels great companies to take the time to understand what makes their customers want to work with them. And that allows them to avoid some of the missteps that we've talked about.
That word is so important. We hear often about transparency, authenticity, but the word empathy isn't as widely discussed.
I think it's assumed sometimes. I think sometimes we assume that we know, but in life we can see from personal experience when we make assumptions about what people want or why, we can sometimes miss the mark.
I'm wondering about when a company does have very distinct ICPs, right? You talked a little bit about that just now, but how do they need to differentiate their messaging if they need to? I'm just thinking back about, I just went to Vietnam as part of my MBA program and had the chance to do some flash consulting for a startup from some university students. And quickly, using some AI tools that I love for just to get some quick brand analysis, was able to come up with, one message that they could use for young professionals and college students for that B2C market, and a different one for the B2B market. So where do you see companies struggle that you work with in differentiating what their message is going to be, or do they have this issue?
I'm glad you mentioned AI. It's the easy button that we can be tempted to push to say, generate messaging for these audiences. And if we do that, we're going to sound the same as other companies who are doing the same thing. So how do we differentiate in the AI era? It comes back to doing the discovery work that we talked about that's at the early phases of work in that branding process. We had a client in the radiology reporting industry, the radiology reporting software, and radiologists look at images that have been taken of a person's body. It could be a broken bone, it might be a cancer diagnosis. The degree of complexity can be very different depending on the patient's case. Radiologists are burned out because there are too many images for too few radiologists to read and interpret. They talk into a dictaphone for 10 hours a day as fast as they can. AI has entered the picture to try to alleviate some of that overwhelm. How to talk to radiologists about the assistance that AI can provide was a key question and consideration when we worked with our client in that radiology reporting software industry. We didn't want to make radiologists feel like they were being subjugated to a technology, that they were being made to be in a lesser role. They had gone to school for 12, 14, maybe more years to get to the point of their ability to take on that responsibility of diagnosing or interpreting what these images were saying and showing. So knowing how to nuance that messaging in a way that would be received well by radiologists without making them feel like they'd been demoted or subjected to a technology that was taking over was a really delicate thing. And the way we went about it was to interview radiologists. And we did this work with the assistance and collaboration of the client team. It's a technical topic, so we did these interviews in tandem. We talked with radiologists from across the US, EMEA, and got a really well-rounded in Australia, got a really well-rounded understanding of how this topic was perceived culturally from a variety of perspectives. And then we used, once we've got those inputs and have had the empathetic conversations to understand what it feels like to be a radiologist in the AI era, we were able to communicate and articulate messaging that we tested with them, found out what resonated, and then we used AI to amplify that message, to take it to market with consistency. So clarity, we believe, should be informed by these primary research activities like in-depth interviews, driven by empathy to genuinely understand what the customer's going through and how and why they're looking for a solution like the one that you're marketing. And once you get clear about that, and you've been able to validate that, yes, you've heard them correctly, the messages are resonating, that's when you use AI to take your story to market at scale with consistency.
Excellent, excellent use case. Many people start with AI, and I will say there are a couple of tools that I will use sometimes. For instance, for this flash consulting, we had 45 minutes to put together a plan. So I definitely was not going to be able to do all the market research, but we were able to put something specific for the Vietnamese market because of the data we were getting, the research that we did with using a tool. But I think so many times people start and stop with generative AI tools rather than using input from the real humans who are going to be highly affected and could be more highly effective in these use cases with this technology, you know, starting with the people and then fine tuning rather than just leaving it all up to the algorithm to give you, here's what we find and here's what you should do. And your message is not going to be different from everybody else's out there.
Right. And I think none of us wants to be treated as a caricature or a stereotype. We want to feel understood and validated as being worthwhile. And the only way to do that, if a brand wants to make that genuine, authentic connection, is you've got to really understand the audience you're trying to connect with. We actually have a tool at Backstory called OnMessage that takes the inputs that have been clarified through a process like the one I described. And agencies are using this. It's not just for Backstory's clients, but it combines that clarity. It absorbs and structures those messaging inputs. And then you can use your AI tool of choice to create audience-specific content. And it can be an ad, a landing page, website copy, a proposal, email drips, whatever content needs to be created. OnMessage can create and structure that message library with clarity as to what the input should be, those messages that you've tested and have gleaned from your conversations with customers, and then take them to market with consistency at scale by allowing everybody on your team to draw from that single source of truth messaging repository to be able to communicate the right messages to the right audiences at the right stage of the customer journey.
Beautiful. I want to ask about the book. What was the inspiration for deciding that you needed to aggregate all of the work that you've done and launch a book that could go out to perhaps people who may not be able to work with you, but still needed this information?
We believe that there's greatness in people and the companies they build and work for, and we want to help them get their greatness out. So a book is a great way to have a bigger impact on more people. The process that is outlined in the book is pretty extensive, and people have asked me before, do you have to do all of the steps in the sequence you've outlined? Ideally, yes, but there are degrees of good, and whatever you can do to incorporate these principles and concepts is going to accelerate your success. So my encouragement would be to read the book and to apply what you can and look for opportunities to combine the best elements that apply to your company at your stage of growth. If you have a smaller team, it's going to be more challenging to do every step in exactly the way that I've outlined. Even so, if you can apply some of the concepts, it will put you in a better position to be successful and to win in your pursuit of greatness.
Fantastic. Where do you see your organization going from here? We, touched on AI a little bit and how it can enhance work, but there are a lot of people who are using it as replacement at this point. And maybe then going back and reassessing and going, oh no, I still need to have humans in the loop. I still need to go actually get data from real people in my organization. But where do you see Backstory branding going from here?
I'm glad you asked. From here, we see us teaching more people how to do our work so that they can have the benefit of the process that we've worked so hard to learn. One way we plan to do that is to provide them with the questions to ask their customers so that they can do these in-depth interviews and use the transcripts that come back from those interviews as input to OnMessage or another tool of their choice to develop a messaging framework that's tuned and tailored based on an empathetic approach to brand discovery, and then produce content using AI tools that is informed by something that's unique to that company and its relationships with its customers. So we'd like to teach more people how to do the brand discovery work so that they can then have better inputs and get better outputs from their AI tools of choice.
So we're going to be seeing some courses, some workshops.
That's right. That's right. And ultimately, it comes down to doing it. Somebody has to do the work. And make no mistake, it's work. Yeah. And I understand that there are times when you have to do the best you can with extremely limited resources and tight time constraints. Over time, if you have the intent to look for opportunities to learn more about what your customers want and why, and what they're already enjoying in their relationship with you, it will become more apparent how you can make those connections happen. And just being observant, being perceptive, and wanting to understand will inspire you and your team to find opportunities to tap into this opportunity to learn. I was just at a client's customer conference, was in St. Louis, and we interviewed partners that were exhibiting at the conference along with customers. And it was a great opportunity. The conversations were long. We didn't cover every topic I would have liked to. Something's better than nothing. And within a few hours, I was able to talk to more than a dozen partners. And that wouldn't have happened if the client and I had had the awareness of the opportunity to connect and to learn, even if it's not perfect. And it helps accelerate the learning process. It helps accelerate your success. It helps you have more confidence and clarity as to what makes you different and why it matters when you take time to get that input and that feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. I want to leave a little teaser. So I could ask you questions all day, I see, but we'll stop here for now. I'd love to bring you back on at a later date to see, what's new, how things have gone with your other launches, where you're seeing industry go, 6 months, a year down the road when we start seeing more of a mix of AI creeping into different business systems and processes, and what that looks like for you at that point, if you are willing.
That'd be great. Love to come back and have another update.
Fantastic. Jed, I always ask, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto?
My favorite mantra is to fulfill the measure of your creation. And what I mean by that is I believe each of us is divine. I believe that we're children of God and that within ourselves we have the potential to develop the talents and abilities we've been given. And I really enjoy trying to help get the greatness out of people and brands because I think that's one way to celebrate the divine nature in us, the God-given talents and abilities that we have. One analogy that I use in the book, in the epilogue at the end of the book, is Michelangelo is well known as a sculptor and artist. What surprised me and my wife when we went to Florence a couple of years ago was a bucket list trip. We were walking toward the David. Along the corridor, during that walk up to the David, there were these unfinished sculptures, and they're called the prisoners, the stone prisoners. And they're unfinished sculptures of Michelangelo's. And you can see these forms and figures, they're kind of contorted, they're kind of stuck in the stone. And when Michelangelo was asked how he did the David, he said, I just removed everything that wasn't the angel inside. So we just try to get rid of anything that's noise, that's not true to your purpose and your gifts and the opportunity you have to be contributing to the world and making a difference. And so we just love the opportunity to work with clients who are stuck, who feel like there is debris that they haven't been able to get clear about what they really are and what they want to contribute. And that's the most satisfying part of our work, is to help people live up to their full potential, to fulfill the full measure of their creation, and to set them free from the things that are holding them back from that clarity perspective.
Inspiring. Thank you so much, Jed Morley, for being on Your Brand Amplified. I got the shivers when you were talking about that, because I also believe in helping people bring out the light inside of them. And that's why I do the things that I do, whether it's teaching or podcasting. So very simpatico. I'm wishing you the most success. And for everybody listening or watching, thank you. I'm going to link to Jed's company, his LinkedIn profile probably, and the book on Amazon so that you can purchase it and learn more about how to get the right mix for yourself, for your organization, and make sure that you're really in tune with the people you need to be in tune with internally, externally, and with your messaging. Don't be that company that changes their messages because of which way the wind is blowing. Maintain consistency, because that is the way that you'll be able to grow. And with that, I hope everybody has a beautiful rest of your day whenever you're listening to this. And I'll be back again with another amazing guest very shortly. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.